When we talk about government scandals, it's almost always about the money. And look, the money in this story is staggering. We're talking about a $329 million deal.
It's massive.
But the thing is, the money here is almost just the backdrop. The real drama, the thing that brought the government to a complete standstill, was about silence.
It really was. It's a case where a guy testifies for 11 hours, a total marathon of speaking, and it's all defined by the 3 minutes where he just refused to talk.
We are digging into the Supreme Court decision in Neri versus the Senate Committee on Accountability. This is from back in 2008. And while it has all the makings of a political thriller, you've got alleged bribes, secret conversations, a cabinet secretary about to be arrested. It's really a masterclass on the limits of power. It asks a really basic question. When the Senate is demanding the truth and the president is demanding secrecy, who wins?
That is the eternal battle of the branches, right? Separation of powers isn't some dry theory in a textbook. It's messy. It's high stakes. And this case, specifically, becomes the definitive guide to executive privilege in the Philippines.
Yeah.
It's what defines when the president can legally look at the Senate and just say, that's none of your business.
Which feels so counterintuitive in a democracy. We're all taught that transparency is, everything. But as we go through this, I think we'll see that total transparency has a price the Supreme Court just wasn't willing to pay.
Right.
So let's set the stage. The year's 2007. The government is pushing this huge project called the NBN, the National Broadband Network.
This is a massive infrastructure deal. The goal was to connect the entire country, the whole archipelago, and the Department of Transportation had lined up a deal with a Chinese firm, ZTE.
And the price tag was, as you said, huge.
Eye-watering. $329,481,290, roughly 16 billion pesos at the time, and it was all funded by a loan from China.
Okay, so a deal that big involving a foreign loan is obviously going to attract attention. The Senate starts smelling smoke. You have Senators Pimentel, Roxas, Lacson, Santiago. They all file resolutions to investigate.
Yeah, they're claiming the whole thing is anomalous, that it's overpriced, and that the legal justification is shaky at best.
And this investigation leads them to one person, Romulo Neri.
Right. At the time, Neri was the Director General of NEDA, the National Economic and Development Authority. So if anyone knew the economic justification for this deal, or, the lack of one, it was him.
And to his credit, he shows up. He doesn't try to hide. He sits in that Senate hot seat for 11 hours straight.
I can't even imagine.
But deep into this testimony, he drops a bomb that just completely changes everything.
He admits to the bribe. Neri testifies under oath that the then chairman of Comelec, a man named Benjamin Abalos, offered him 200 million pesos to approve the project.
200 million. That's not exactly a subtle little side payment.
No. And Neri says he didn't just sit on this. He went directly to the president at the time, Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. He told her about the bribe attempt.
And what was her response?
According to Neri's testimony, her instruction was very simple. Do not accept the bribe.
Okay. And that's where it all gets complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because up to this point, Neri is cooperating.
He is. But the Senate wants to know what happened next. Their logic was, well, if the president knew about a massive bribery attempt tied to this project, her actions after knowing that are absolutely critical.
So they start drilling down into his conversations with her. And they hit a brick wall. Neri invokes executive privilege.
He refuses to answer 3 very specific questions.
And the wording here really matters. Question 1.
Right.
Whether the president followed up on the NBN project.
Right. They're trying to see if she was still actively pushing for it, even after knowing about the bribe.
Then question 2. Were you dictated to prioritize the ZTE?
Looking for that undue influence, was she telling him to favor this specific company?
And then question 3, and this feels like the one they were really after. Whether the president said to go ahead and approve the project after being told about the alleged bribe.
That's the one. That's the potential smoking gun. Did she know about the corruption and just say, push it through anyway? But Neri refused to answer. He said those conversations were privileged.
The Senate did not take that well.
Not at all. They issue a subpoena for him to return. Neri doesn't show up. Then the executive secretary, or Mita, writes to the Senate and basically says, look, he's not coming. Those conversations are covered by executive privilege.
Yeah, the Senate just escalates.
They go all in. They cite Neri in contempt and they order his arrest. They literally send the sergeant-at-arms to go and physically detain a sitting cabinet secretary.
Which is what forces the Supreme Court to step in and play referee. Neri files a petition to stop the arrest, and this is where we get into the real meat of the legal arguments. The court has to define what this executive privilege thing actually is.
Because to a lot of people, it just sounds like a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly. Like a legal way to say cover-up.
Right, but the court really digs into the legal history here, borrowing a lot from U.S. case law, and they make it clear this is not some blanket immunity. In fact, they split it into two different types of privilege.
Okay, what were they?
The first one is called presidential communications privilege. That's the big one. It's the strongest kind, and it applies specifically to the decision-making of the president herself.
So conversations she's directly involved in.
Directly. And it's rooted in this idea that she is the head of a co-equal branch of government. The other type is the deliberative process privilege.
And that's for everyone else in the executive branch, like agency officials.
Generally, yeah. It protects the drafts, the recommendations, the back and forth that leads up to a final decision. But the key here is that the court ruled Neri's conversations fell into that first bucket, the stronger presidential one.
Because he was talking directly to the president.
That's part of it, but they use this test called operational proximity. It sounds technical, but it's actually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
It just means how close are you operationally to the president. The privilege doesn't apply to some random clerk. It applies to the president's inner circle, the close advisors. And as a cabinet member and head of NNIDA, Neri was definitely in that circle.
So he's close enough to claim the privilege. But I'm still stuck on the why. Why does the Constitution protect secrecy? Shouldn't we want a president's decisions out in the open, especially when there are billions of pesos on the line?
The court addresses this head-on, and they cite the famous American case, United States versus Nixon. They argue that for a president to be effective, they need what they call candid, objective, and even blunt or harsh opinions.
Blunt advice.
Think about it. If you're an advisor and you know that every single thing you say to the president could be subpoenaed by the Senate tomorrow and broadcast on national TV.
You'd probably watch what you say. You'd play it safe.
You'd self-censor. Exactly. And the court's reasoning is that a president who only gets safe, filtered advice is actually a danger to the country. They need that private space to have the tough arguments, to explore all the options so they can make the best possible decision in public.
So the secrecy isn't to hide things, it's to protect the quality of the decision-making process itself.
That's the argument. And in Neri's case, there was another layer, diplomacy. The deal was with a Chinese company, funded by a Chinese loan. Revealing those internal discussions could seriously harm diplomatic and economic relations with China.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
But here's the part that I think trips everyone up. You mentioned Nixon. That's the Watergate case. Nixon had to hand over the takes. He lost. Neri won. Why was this different?
This is probably the most crucial legal distinction in the entire case, and it's really where the Senate's argument just fell apart. In Nixon, there was a pending criminal trial.
Okay, a criminal case.
Yes. The information was needed for the administration of justice in a court of law. Here, with Neri, it was a legislative inquiry.
So the standard is different.
Completely different. The court said that in a criminal trial, the need for evidence is almost absolute. But in a legislative inquiry, the Senate is supposedly just gathering information to help them write new laws.
But wait, wouldn't uncovering corruption help them write better anti-corruption laws? I mean, isn't that in aid of legislation?
In theory, yes. But the court applied a really strict test. They asked, is this specific information demonstrably critical to writing a law?
And the Senate couldn't prove that.
No. They failed to show that they absolutely needed to know what the president said to Neri on that specific day to write a new law about government contracts. They already had the testimony about the bribe itself.
So the bar is just much, much higher for the Senate than it is for a prosecutor in a criminal case.
Exactly. And the court actually went a step further. They said it looked like the Senate was doing oversight, not aid of legislation.
I saw that. What's the difference, practically speaking?
Think of it like this. Aid of legislation is like an architect studying the land to design a new building. They need information to create something new. Oversight is like a building inspector checking to see if the current building is up to code. The Constitution gives the Senate huge powers to build new things, new laws. But their power to just inspect the executive's day-to-day work is much more limited.
So the court said the Senate was acting like an inspector, but trying to use the powers of an architect.
That's a perfect way to put it. And because they couldn't show that critical need to build a new law, the president's need for confidentiality won out.
So Neri wins on the big constitutional points. But here's where the story gets honestly kind of wild. Because even if he'd lost that privilege argument, the court still would have thrown out the arrest order.
Yes. This is the part that just makes legal experts shake their heads. The Senate didn't just lose on high-minded principles, they completely failed on basic procedure. The court found they committed grave abuse of discretion.
And it wasn't just one mistake. It was like a comedy of errors.
It really was. First, the Constitution says that all these inquiries have to be done according to duly published rules of procedure.
It sounds basic. You have to tell everyone the rules of the game before you play.
Right. But here's the thing. Every Congress is distinct. This was the 14th Congress, and they hadn't actually published their rules for inquiries in the official Gazette or a newspaper yet.
You're kidding. So they were holding hearings and ordering arrests based on rules that legally didn't exist.
In the eyes of the court, yes. The entire process was flawed from the start. You can't just arrest someone based on unpublished rules. It's a fundamental due process violation.
That's unbelievable. But it didn't stop there. There was the problem with the vote, right?
The second major error. To hold someone in contempt, the rules require a majority vote of all the members of the committee, not just a majority of whoever happens to be in the room that day.
They didn't have the numbers.
Not even close. The transcript shows them trying to count members who weren't there, trying to get signatures after the fact. The court just said no. An arrest order based on a minority vote is invalid. Period.
It almost feels like they got so caught up in the politics of it all, they forgot to actually do the basic math.
Which points to the third failure. Arbitrary dismissal. When Neri's lawyer claimed privilege, the Senate didn't really debate it or rule on it. They just declared it unsatisfactory and moved to arrest him.
So they just said, nope, and moved on.
You can't do that. You have to explain why a constitutional claim is invalid before you punish someone for making it. And on top of all of that, they ignored his request for the questions in advance.
Right. He basically said, I'll come back, just tell me what you're going to ask so I can prepare. And they just ignored him.
So you add it all up. They tried to arrest a man using unpublished rules, without enough votes, without a proper ruling on his defense, and after denying a reasonable request.
That's a procedural train wreck.
It is. The Supreme Court essentially told the Senate, look, even if you're right about the corruption, you cannot just trample all over the process to get what you want.
The ends don't justify the means.
Especially when the means involve taking away someone's liberty.
So this brings us to the big picture takeaway. For the listener, this feels complicated. On one hand, the court protected the separation of powers. On the other, we have this credible bribe allegation, and the key conversations about it stay secret forever.
And that is the tension. But the real lesson here isn't just about this one deal. It's about the architecture of government. The court is basically saying the public's right to information isn't absolute. It has to be balanced against the executive's ability to actually govern.
If the Senate could just demand every private conversation.
The presidency would cease to be an independent branch. It would just become a subordinate of the legislature. The court is protecting the institution of the presidency, even if it causes frustration in one specific case.
They're playing the long game.
Exactly. Our system of checks and balances is designed to be inefficient. It's designed to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful, not necessarily to make every investigation quick and easy.
Before we wrap up, there was one little part of the decision I found really interesting. The court didn't just tell the Senate they were wrong. They kind of suggested a better way.
Ah, you mean the compromise suggestion?
Yeah. They cited a U.S. case, U.S. versus AT&T, where the court basically told the branches to stop fighting in public and go work it out.
It's a fascinating idea. The court suggested that instead of this all-or-nothing game, arrest him, versus I refuse to talk. They could have negotiated a solution. Maybe Neri gives the information in a closed-door session? Maybe the Senate agrees to limit the questions.
It makes you wonder, if the Senate had just taken a breath and offered a closed session, or sent the questions in advance, could they have gotten the answers they wanted?
It's entirely possible. By going for the political spectacle of an arrest, they forced the executive to raise the constitutional shield of privilege. A quieter, more careful approach might have actually gotten them more truth in the end.
It makes you think that sometimes the gridlock we see in government isn't inevitable. It's a choice to posture instead of to compromise.
It's a lesson that being right isn't always enough. You also have to be procedurally correct and, willing to meet the other side halfway.
A lesson for the Senate, and maybe for all of us. Well, that's it for this deep dive. A complex case, but hopefully the next time you hear the term executive privilege, you'll know it's not just a legal loophole, it's a constitutional battleground.
Thanks for having me.
We'll catch you on the next one.